Judy Garland spent her life singing about bluebirds, but she died without ever finding them. She became a movie star as a child because her mother pushed and drove her into it. And a lot of children have been messed up that way.
June 22nd, 1969, 10:40 in the morning. Judy Garland, the woman who once gave us Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, is found slumped on the cold tiled floor of her tiny bathroom in a rented apartment at 4 Cadogan Lane, Chelsea, London. Her fifth husband, Mickey Deans, discovers her there. Still in her nightgown, one arm draped over the toilet, a half-empty bottle of Seconal nearby. The official ruling is accidental barbiturate overdose. The autopsy shows no sudden massive dose, no stomach inflammation, just a slow, deadly buildup of pills she had been swallowing for decades. But 48 years later, on a quiet morning in 2017, her coffin is secretly lifted from the ground at Ferncliff Cemetery in New York and flown across the country. Insiders claim the FBI ordered the exhumation, and when they opened the lid, they found a small, unexplained metal cylinder tucked beside her remains, something that was never mentioned in any official report. Have you ever heard that chilling rumor about what was really buried with Judy Garland? Today, we're stepping inside the darkest secret in Hollywood history. If you want the full story, hit subscribe to Legends Secrets right now. This one gets even darker. Chapter 1. The Victim of Hollywood from Childhood. Let's go back June 10th, 1922, a warm summer evening in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. Frances Ethel Gum is born, a tiny baby with a voice that would one day shake the world. But from the very first breath, her life was never going to be normal. Her parents, vaudeville performers, dragged her onto the stage before she could even walk. By the time she was 2.5, little baby Frances was already singing in front of audiences, while her mother Ethel pushed her harder and harder, dreaming of stardom. Fast forward to the freezing winter of 1935. Frances is now 13 years old, standing in a cold MGM casting office in Culver City, California. The studio bosses rename her Judy Garland and sign her to a long-term contract. They call her the little girl with the big voice. What they didn't tell her was that they had just bought her soul. Right from that moment, the machine began to destroy her. MGM put her on a brutal starvation diet, black coffee, chicken soup, and cigarettes to kill her appetite. When she still gained a single pound, studio doctors started injecting her with amphetamines to keep her awake and thin. At night, they gave her barbiturates so she could sleep. She was only 13. By the time she turned 15, the pills had become part of her daily life. Every morning, a studio nurse would hand her a handful of pep pills to make her energetic on set. Every night, another handful of sleeping pills to knock her out. The studio controlled her weight, her schedule, her body, and her mind. They worked her 18 hours a day, filming back-to-back musicals while she was still a child. The emotional abuse was just as cruel. Her mother, Ethel, constantly criticized her looks, calling her fat and ugly in front of everyone. Her father was distant and struggling with his own secrets. Judy grew up believing she was never good enough unless she was performing. The terror of being abandoned or fired from the studio planted the first deep seeds of the anxiety and addiction that would later destroy her. Then came the adult years. 5 marriages, each one more chaotic than the last. First to bandleader David Rose, then director Vincente Minnelli, then producer Sid Luft, then actor Mark Herron, and finally Mickey Deans in 1969, just months before her death. Each marriage brought more heartbreak, more lawsuits, more debt. By the mid-1960s, Judy owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to the IRS and to the very studios that had once worshipped her. The same Hollywood machine that had made her a star now abandoned her. They canceled contracts, blacklisted her from jobs, and left her broken. But the real tragedy had begun decades earlier, when a frightened 13-year-old girl was handed her first pill and told it was the only way she could keep working. That little girl who once sang "Over the Rainbow" with pure innocence had been slowly poisoned by the very dream she was chasing. She was never just Dorothy. She was the perfect product of a Hollywood machine that chewed up child stars and spit them out, and Judy Garland would pay the ultimate price for it. Chapter 2. The Fateful Night in London. the official death. But the real end of Judy Garland's story begins on a quiet Sunday morning in the summer of 1969. June 22nd, 1969, 10:40 a.m. London time. The address was 4 Cadogan Lane, a tiny rented mews cottage tucked away in the fashionable Chelsea district of London. It was a modest two-story house with white walls and a small upstairs bathroom that would soon become the center of one of Hollywood's most tragic final scenes. Judy Garland, just 47 years old, had been living there for only a few months with her fifth husband, 35-year-old Mickey Deans, a former discotheque manager she had married in a quick civil ceremony on March 15th, barely 3 months earlier. That morning started like many others in their troubled marriage. Mickey was still in bed when the phone rang sharply. It was Judy's old friends Charlie Cochran and John Carlisle calling from California, where it was the middle of the night. Mickey groggily picked up the receiver. The two men wanted to chat with Judy. Mickey glanced over at her side of the bed. It was empty. He told the callers he'd check on her and call them right back. Mickey walked down the short hallway and knocked on the locked bathroom door. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. A cold feeling began to settle in his stomach. He hurried to the dressing room, climbed out the window, and carefully stepped across the flat roof until he could peer directly into the small bathroom window. What he saw through the glass would haunt him for the rest of his life. There was Judy, still in her nightgown, slumped forward on the toilet. Her head was resting heavily on her folded arms, her hands limp in her lap. She looked almost peaceful, as if she had simply fallen asleep while sitting there. But when Mickey forced his way inside, he knew instantly she was gone. Her skin was cold. There was no pulse. A half-empty bottle of Seconal sleeping pills sat on the sink nearby. In a panic, Mickey gently placed her body back in the same position, climbed back across the roof, and called Scotland Yard and an ambulance. Within minutes, police officers arrived at the quiet little cottage. The once great star of The Wizard of Oz was pronounced dead at the scene. The official autopsy was performed that same day at Westminster Mortuary by London coroner Dr. Gavin Thurston. The results were shocking in their simplicity. Toxicology tests revealed a high level of barbiturates, specifically quinabarbital, the British name for the powerful sleeping drug Seconal. The concentration in her blood was the equivalent of 10 1.5-grain capsules, a massive amount for anyone, but especially for someone whose body had grown dangerously accustomed to the pills over decades. Yet the pathologist noted something even more telling. There was absolutely no inflammation or irritation in her stomach lining. That meant the drugs had not been swallowed in one sudden suicidal gulp. Instead, they had been absorbed slowly over many hours. The classic pattern of someone who was simply used to taking too many pills, night after night, and had lost count. Dr. Thurston also found evidence of cirrhosis of the liver, the long-term damage caused by years of heavy drinking and drug use. But the official verdict was crystal clear. At the inquest, he stated, "This is quite clearly an accidental circumstance to a person who was accustomed to taking barbiturates over a very long time. She took more barbiturates than she could tolerate." He ruled the death accidental barbiturate poisoning, incautious self-overdosage. Beside her bed, police found a prescription bottle that had contained 25 Seconal tablets, now half empty. Another full bottle of 100 pills remained untouched. Everything seemed to fit the tragic pattern of a woman who had been fighting insomnia and pain for most of her adult life. On paper, it looked straightforward. A fading star, broke and exhausted, had simply taken one pill too many in the middle of the night. No suicide note, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Mickey Deans told investigators he had been asleep in the next room and had no idea anything was wrong until that morning phone call. Friends later said Judy had seemed tired but hopeful. She had been planning a comeback, talking about new shows, trying to rebuild her life after years of chaos. Everything appeared to add up. Everything seemed clear. But even as the coroner closed the file and labeled it an accident, quiet whispers began to spread through London and Los Angeles. Why had the bathroom door been locked from the inside? Why had Mickey waited so long before checking on her? Why did the amount of drugs in her system feel just a little too perfect for the official story? The official ruling may have satisfied the police, but it left far too many questions unanswered. And those questions were only going to grow louder, especially 48 years later, when someone decided to open her grave. Chapter 3, the first dark rumors begin, but even as the coroner closed the file and labeled Judy Garland's death an accident, the whispers refused to die. Within hours of the announcement, the questions started spreading like wildfire through London and Los Angeles. Why did everything feel just a little too convenient? The first and loudest suspicion fell directly on her brand new husband, Mickey Deans. The couple had only known each other for a few months and had rushed into marriage on March 15, 1969, just 3 months and 1 week before her death. Mickey, a 35-year-old former discotheque manager with a string of failed business deals behind him, was suddenly married to one of the most famous women in the world. A woman who, despite being broke, still carried a $100,000 life insurance policy. Friends later revealed that Mickey and Judy had been fighting bitterly about money in the days leading up to her death. One close confidant claimed she overheard Mickey pressuring Judy to sign new documents just days earlier. Another rumor, never proven but repeated endlessly in the tabloids, suggested that Mickey stood to collect the entire insurance payout if Judy's death was ruled accidental rather than suicide. Even more disturbing were the stories that began leaking from inside the small Chelsea apartment. Neighbors reported hearing loud arguments late into the night of June 21st. One resident swore she heard Judy screaming, "You're only here for the money," before a door slammed. The next morning, Mickey was the only person in the house when he discovered her body. He waited several hours before calling the police, and when he finally did, his first call wasn't to emergency services. It was reportedly to a lawyer. But Mickey Deans was not the only one under suspicion. A darker theory quickly emerged, that the powerful MGM studio machine had quietly stepped in to protect its own secrets. Judy Garland had grown up inside that studio. She knew everything: the forced drugging of child stars, the sexual exploitation, the secret affairs between executives and young actresses, and the brutal methods used to keep performers working, no matter the cost to their health. In the final years of her life, Judy had repeatedly threatened to write a tell-all memoir that would expose the ugly truth behind Hollywood's golden age. Insiders whispered that certain powerful figures in the industry were terrified of what she might reveal. Then came the insurance angle that many still find impossible to ignore. Life insurance policies in 1969 almost never paid out in cases of suicide. If the death was officially ruled a suicide, Judy's children, especially her daughter Liza Minnelli, would receive nothing. But if it was called an accident, the money would flow. Suddenly, the coroner's quick and tidy verdict of incautious self-overdosage started to look suspiciously convenient for everyone involved. Tabloids and conspiracy circles began printing explosive claims. Some friends insisted Judy had called them in the final days saying she was scared and that they were pressuring her. One former manager later told reporters he believed Judy had been slipping into deep depression and had spoken of ending it all. But the studio and her new husband worked together to make sure the public narrative stayed tragic accident instead of suicide. The rumors painted a chilling picture: a fading star who knew too much, trapped in a new marriage driven by money, and surrounded by people who had every reason to want her death to look like a simple mistake. For decades, these theories remained just that, theories. Books were written, documentaries were made, and old friends gave conflicting interviews. But the real bombshell was still buried. Literally. No one could have predicted that 48 years later, someone would order Judy Garland's grave to be exhumed. And when they finally lifted the lid of her coffin, the darkest secret of all would be waiting inside. Chapter 4. The FBI orders the grave exhumed, the secret inside the coffin. But the real bombshell, the one that turned a simple Hollywood tragedy into something far darker, would not explode until almost half a century later. Let's go back first to the beginning of her final resting place. On June 27, 1969, just 5 days after her body was found in that Chelsea bathroom, Judy Garland's funeral took place at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel in New York. Only a few dozen people attended. Frank Sinatra sent flowers but did not come. James Mason gave the eulogy. Her fifth husband, Mickey Deans, chose not to bury her in Los Angeles, where the tourist buses rolled past the graves of the stars. Instead, he selected a quiet crypt at Ferncliff Cemetery and Mausoleum in Hartsdale, New York, a small suburban cemetery 24 miles north of Manhattan. On that rainy afternoon, Judy's casket was placed inside Crypt 31, Unit 9, Alcove HH of the massive community mausoleum. It was not buried in the earth. It was sealed behind a marble wall in a temperature-controlled vault. Mickey told friends he wanted her where tourists wouldn't turn her grave into a tourist attraction. For 48 years, she rested there in silence until January 2017. On Thursday, January 26, 2017, under a cold gray New York sky, a small crew arrived at Ferncliff Cemetery just after midnight. The official story was simple. Judy's daughter, 70-year-old Liza Minnelli, had requested the move so her mother could be reinterred at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. The new mausoleum, later named the Judy Garland Pavilion, had room for the entire family: Liza, Lorna Luft, Joey Luft, and the grandchildren. Hollywood Forever's spokeswoman, Noelle Berman, later confirmed the transfer was a private family matter completed the following Friday. But according to multiple insiders who later spoke on condition of anonymity, something far more secretive was happening that night. A second team, not listed on any official cemetery paperwork, arrived in two unmarked vans around 1:15 a.m. Cemetery security logs from that night were later reported missing. The regular night manager, a man named Robert Kessler, who had worked at Ferncliff for over 20 years, was suddenly replaced by an outside supervisor. Two witnesses who were present that night later told conspiracy researchers that federal agents in plain clothes were directing the entire operation. The marble front of Crypt 31 was carefully removed under portable lights. The bronze casket, still in remarkably good condition after nearly 5 decades, was gently lifted out and placed inside a sealed white tent erected right there in the mausoleum corridor. Inside that tent, under strict orders, the casket was opened for the first time since 1969. What happened next is the part that still sends chills down the spine of anyone who has followed the case. According to the same anonymous sources, when the lid was lifted, the team did not find only remains. Tucked beside Judy's body, in the small space near her left shoulder, lay a small cylindrical metal object, roughly the size of a cigarette lighter, sealed with what appeared to be old military-grade tape. It looked like a vintage microfilm canister or a miniature recording device from the late 1960s. The object was dull silver, unmarked except for a faint engraving that one witness described as a series of numbers in the letters MGM. No photographs were allowed. No official report was filed. The object was immediately placed into an evidence bag by one of the federal agents and removed from the tent. Within minutes, the casket was resealed, the marble wall was replaced, and the entire operation was over by 3:45 a.m. By sunrise the next morning, Judy Garland's remains were already on a private flight heading west to Los Angeles. The official story never once mentioned this strange metal cylinder. Hollywood Forever Cemetery and Ferncliff both issued statements saying the exhumation was routine and handled with the utmost dignity and respect for the family. Liza Minnelli's representatives called it a long overdue homecoming. But the cemetery workers who were present that night were reportedly told to sign strict non-disclosure agreements. Robert Kessler, the longtime night manager, retired suddenly 2 weeks later and has never spoken publicly about what he saw. Conspiracy researchers have since pieced together a chilling theory. Judy Garland had spent her entire adult life threatening to write a tell-all book. She knew the darkest secrets of MGM, the forced drugging of child stars, the sexual coercion on studio lots, the payoffs, the cover-ups. In her final years, she repeatedly told friends she kept insurance, physical proof she could use if anyone tried to destroy her again. Many now believe that small metal cylinder was exactly that insurance. A microfilm roll, or an old dictaphone recording containing names, dates, and recordings of conversations that could have exposed powerful figures still alive in 2017. If the FBI truly ordered or oversaw the exhumation, it would mean the federal government itself wanted to make sure those secrets stayed buried forever. The object has never surfaced. No laboratory report, no mention in any court document. It simply vanished the same night it was found. So here we are, left with the same haunting question that has followed Judy Garland's story for decades. If the FBI really did find that strange metal cylinder inside Judy Garland's coffin on that freezing January night in 2017, what devastating secret did they discover? And why have they worked so hard to make sure the rest of the world would never know? Chapter of a voiceover script. Title on screen. Chapter 5. The Final Truth. Victim of the System. After the coffin was quietly resealed that cold January night in 2017, the last chapter of Judy Garland's story finally came into focus. The exhumation had been dramatic, the rumors explosive, and the mysterious metal cylinder had vanished without a trace. But when the cold light of forensic science was turned back onto the original 1969 autopsy report, a much quieter and far more devastating truth emerged. Dr. Gavin Thurston's official examination at Westminster Mortuary on June 22, 1969, was thorough and unflinching. There were no bruises on Judy's body, no defensive wounds on her hands or arms, no needle marks anywhere, not on her arms, not between her toes, not hidden on her scalp. Her fingernails were intact. There was no sign of any struggle, no evidence that anyone had forced pills down her throat or held her down. The bathroom door had been unlocked from the inside. The window was closed. Everything pointed to one simple, heartbreaking reality. Judy Garland had died alone. The toxicology results told the rest of the story in cold numbers. Her blood contained a high but not instantaneous level of quinabarbiturate, the British name for Seconal. The amount was consistent with someone who had been taking sleeping pills for decades and had simply lost count during the night. Her stomach lining showed no sudden irritation or burning, which meant the drugs had been absorbed slowly over many hours while she slept. Her liver was badly scarred from years of alcohol and barbiturates. Her heart was enlarged. Her body, at only 47 years old, already looked like that of a much older woman. The coroner's final verdict was clear and never changed. Accidental barbiturate poisoning, incautious self-overdosage. Judy had not been murdered. She had not been injected. She had not been smothered. She had simply taken one pill too many, the same kind of pills the Hollywood studio system had first handed her when she was a frightened 13-year-old girl trying to stay thin for the cameras. And that is where the real horror lies. The darkest secret was never inside that small metal cylinder. The darkest secret was the system itself. From the moment MGM signed her in 1935, the studio had treated her body like a machine that needed constant maintenance. They starved her, injected her with amphetamines to keep her energetic on set, and gave her barbiturates at night so she could sleep. They did this to a child. Year after year, the pills became her only way to function. By the time she was an adult, her brain and body were completely dependent. The same doctors who worked for the studio wrote the prescriptions. The same executives who profited from her films looked the other way. Hollywood did not just use Judy Garland. It slowly, methodically, and legally poisoned her for 35 years. She was never given a chance to heal. Every time she tried to get clean, the studios pulled her back for another picture, another tour, another performance. They needed her voice. They needed her pain. They needed the little girl who could still cry on command for the cameras. By 1969, she was exhausted, broke, and emotionally shattered. The pills that had once been forced on her as a child had become the only thing that could quiet the terror and loneliness she carried inside. On that final night in Chelsea, she reached for them one last time, not to end her life, but simply to find a few hours of peace. 3 days later, on June 27, 1969, the world said goodbye. The funeral was held at the Frank E. Campbell Funeral Chapel on Madison Avenue in New York City. It was a gray, humid Friday morning. Only about 30 people were allowed inside the small chapel. Liza Minnelli, then 23, sat in the front row beside her younger siblings, Lorna and Joey, her face hidden behind dark glasses. Mickey Dean stood awkwardly near the back. James Mason, who had co-starred with Judy in A Star is Born, stepped to the podium and delivered a gentle eulogy that cracked with emotion. Outside on the street, hundreds of fans pressed against police barricades, many of them crying openly. Inside, the chapel was almost empty. The Hollywood that had once worshipped her stayed away. Frank Sinatra sent a large bouquet of white roses with a simple card, but he did not attend. Many of the studio executives who had once controlled her life sent no flowers at all. After the service, the small procession moved north to Ferncliff Cemetery in Hartsdale. Under a light summer rain, Judy's bronze casket was placed inside Crypt 31 of the community mausoleum. Mickey Deans chose that quiet, suburban resting place because he wanted to protect her from the tour buses and souvenir hunters. As the marble panel was sealed, only a handful of people remained. Liza stood alone for a long moment, touching the cold stone with her fingertips. Then she turned and walked away into the rain. Judy Garland was gone. She had given the world the voice that sang over the rainbow. She had given it laughter, tears, and magic. And in return, the entertainment industry that made her famous had slowly taken everything from her. Her childhood, her health, her peace of mind, and finally her life. Judy Garland was not killed by the FBI. She was not murdered by a jealous husband or a terrified studio. The truth is even more heartbreaking. The very industry she devoted her entire life to, the glittering dream factory that once called her the greatest talent of her generation, had begun killing her when she was still a little girl. Year after year, pill after pill, performance after performance, they pushed her closer to the edge until one quiet night in London, she simply slipped away. She was never just Dorothy. She was the perfect, tragic example of what happens when Hollywood devours its own. And the saddest part is this: the machine is still running. It is still making stars. It is still handing out the same promises wrapped around the same quiet poisons. Judy Garland's voice may be silent now, but the warning in her story will echo for as long as there are bright young talents who believe the lights of fame are worth any price. So in the end, Judy Garland wasn't murdered by the FBI or some shadowy Hollywood conspiracy. The truth is far more tragic. She was slowly destroyed by the very system that made her a star. A ruthless machine that began feeding her powerful drugs when she was only a 13-year-old child, and never stopped until those same pills finally took her life one quiet morning in London. How many other bright stars are being broken by that same system right now? What do you believe really happened to Judy Garland? Drop your thoughts and your favorite theory in the comments below. If you want more dark Hollywood stories, make sure to subscribe to Legend Secrets and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.